Could the Nashville Predators finish second in the Central Division? One national writer thinks so. We'll tell you how likely we think that is and what it would take to be one of the best in the Central on today's Locked On Predators podcast.
You're Locked On Predators, your daily podcast on the Nashville Predators, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Locked On Predators podcast. Thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We are your free daily Nashville Predators podcast. We're a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Want to kick off this Tuesday episode welcoming any first-time listeners and, of course, giving a shout out to our everydayers and to our Locked On Predators insiders. We appreciate your support and we love talking Nashville Predators hockey with you. I am Ann Kimmel. I'm a writer with Penalty Box Radio, and my friends, you know I have a partner in crime.
You do. I'm Emma Lingen, and I'm the Predators site editor and reporter for the Hockey News.
Speaking of the hockey news is Adam Proteau predicted how the 2024-25 Central Division would finish. And y'all, there was quite a surprise in his piece. We're going to tell you why Adam thinks the Predators could leapfrog into second place in a very competitive Central Division. We're also going to share our thoughts on what would have to happen to make that bold prediction come true. Before we dive into that topic, want to let you know today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Okay, Emma, we are talking the hockey news, something that you and I are very familiar with. And this, I have to tell you, I think is one of the boldest takes when it comes to next season, and it comes from the Hockey News' Adam Proteau. He did an article. He's been working on a series predicting the outcome of each of the divisions for the 2024-25 season. And I got to be honest with you, when this Central Division prediction piece dropped, so did my jaw. I was really shocked by what he had to say. When you read the article, what was your initial reaction?
Kind of similar to what we talked about on the show, I think it was last week, with the NHL.com Super 16 rankings when Nashville was ranked number 7. And we were kind of like, okay. Love the optimism. That was kind of my reaction with this as well.
Yeah. So in case you haven't read the piece, again, it's at the Hockey News, but Adam had predicted that the Nashville Predators would finish second in the Central Division, not third or fourth, like maybe Emma and I have kind of thought, but he is predicting second. Of course, let's talk about who is at the top of the division, Emma. And I don't think there's really any surprise here. Adam predicts that the Dallas Stars are going to be the team at the top of the division. And I think that this is an extremely valid argument to be made for this. He talks about the fact that they have a very solid roster. You've got veterans who are still right in the thick of their prime. You've got these young players coming in who are ready to prove themselves. Yes, their defense looks a little different, but it's not like they took a big step back. When you look at what Dallas has on their roster, is it safe to say that you agree with me and with Adam that the Stars are probably the team to beat in the Central Division?
Yeah, and I've said this before. I mean, I said it last year. They were my preseason pick to win the Stanley Cup. I just think from top to bottom, they are the best team in the division. Now, does Colorado have some better individual players on their roster? Yes. Does Nashville? Yes. But I think if we're talking about a complete team in, the building of a championship team, I think Dallas has the most complete team. And for that reason, I would once again put them at the top of the division.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And what's funny is even they didn't lose a lot of pieces. Of course, Pavelski retired and they did shift a couple pieces on defense, but everybody is still so solid, still really in a good place in their game. And then like the young players, this Wyatt Johnston is incredible. Maverick Bork is a player that I saw a lot watching AHL games, and he's gonna have a shot in Dallas. And it's like, okay, they really have some young talent coming. So I just don't think enough has changed to drop Dallas. And, you got to talk about Jake Ottinger. I don't know that I would say Jake Ottinger is a top 5 goaltender in the NHL by any stretch, but he is plenty good. And he may be all you need because, like you said, top to bottom, Dallas just has such a great roster. And honestly, if you look at how they finished last season, even though they didn't get to the Stanley Cup Finals, they were at the top of the league in everything that mattered: offense, defense, special teams, face-off wins. They just have it together. They just have it together.
Yeah, they do. And I think coaching is a big piece of that. Coaching and like management. I just think it's a really well-run organization. So I think it's just, they have, like you said, so many advantages. And, for their sake, they're just going to want to hope that they don't maybe run out of steam, kind of the way they did in the playoffs last season. But now, like we've been saying, regardless of what happens here and where Nashville ends up in the division rankings, it should be a more interesting race this year, like for the top of the division. I mean, yes, the Central has, maybe we're a little bit biased, but I think it's, pretty widely regarded as one of, if not the hardest divisions in the league. And that hasn't changed, but I think it's like usually, at least for the last 2, 3, maybe even 4 years, you kind of have the same group of teams at the top. And then it's like you have the haves and the have-nots. And the Predators have always been, it feels like, on the upper end of the have-not. And they've never quite made it. They're not at the bottom. They're not terrible, but it's like they've never quite made it into that next tier. And now I think, regardless of whether, like Adam says, if they're going to finish second or third or first, who knows? I think regardless of where they finish, they're in the conversation now, which is new territory for them, at least in recent years.
Yes, absolutely agree. And, for them to leapfrog Colorado, I think is a really big thing. And Adam laid out his reasonings. This is where it gets wild, y'all. Second in the Central. So Adam laid out sort of his reasoning for why he feels like Nashville is probably going to be that second. It's going to finish that second spot in the Central. First reason, one of the best off seasons of any team in the NHL. And I would agree with that. I think you would be very hard pressed to find a team that did more to improve their roster than Nashville did this offseason. To be honest, not only did you get one of the big free agents, you got 2 of them. When it comes to offensive weapons, you have dramatically improved your power play with the addition of Steven Stamkos and Jonathan Marchessault. And, you have said this on so many episodes, and I'm going to be honest, it took me a while to come around to this and not feel hurt by it, but Brady Skjei has stepped in, and this is a player who can absolutely fill the Ryan Patrick McDonough absence since he returned to Tampa Bay. So I would agree. I just don't know that there's another team that had a more successful offseason than Nashville did.
Yeah, I think you nailed it, saying like if we're looking at which team in the Central has done the most this offseason to improve year over year over where they were last year, then yeah, Nashville's number 1, like by a mile. They've done everything. Like you'd be hard pressed to find any team, not just in the Central, but any team in the league that's done as much as they have in one offseason to improve their team. But I think it's all relative, right? And so it's like, yes, they've done the most. And that's kind of what I'm saying is, all right, them doing all of that puts them in the conversation, which is a lot farther ahead than they were before. So yes, they have improved, at least on paper, exponentially. But they're improving enough to be in the mix with Dallas and Colorado, not just to be like, oh yeah, this is a better team than Dallas and Colorado.
Yes.
It's like, oh, now these are more kind of on par with each other. And they're sort of like, it makes it more interesting. Like I said, it's not just going to be a battle, or it shouldn't just be a battle between the same two teams at the top anymore.
Yeah. Coming up, we're going to share 2 other reasons why Adam Proteau believes that Nashville could finish second in the Central Division. And we're going to tell you what could ruin this very optimistic prediction. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Friends, this is the most wonderful time of the year for sports. Of course, the NFL is in full swing. Major League Baseball playoffs are kicking in, and hockey season, oh, it is just right around the corner. And the best place to celebrate all of the sports action is with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. NFL fans, you can kick off your season with a big return at FanDuel. When you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, you can view live play-by-play, and so much more, all on the same page where you place your bets. And you can get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's right, $200 in bonus bets guaranteed with your first $5 bet. Be sure to check out all the deals and all the action at fanduel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. Okay, Emma and I are talking about this like mind-blowing prediction in the hockey news by Adam Proteau, who says that he is predicting Nashville will finish second behind Dallas in the Central Division. And we talked about, one of his reasons is what a great offseason the Nashville Predators had. The second thing that he mentioned, and this is a hill I'm going to die on, how important it was to get UC Saros's deal done. And I just want to say, for all of the people who were like, Predators missed their chance to move Saros and get that #1C, elite center, having him back is a huge factor in why Adam Proteau believes that Nashville can get that high up in a very competitive Central Division.
You don't get the elite 1C if you don't have Saros,
Take it home. Yes.
unless you're getting that 1C through the draft, in which case that's fine, but he's not going to be your elite 1C for several years now. And the window changes, it shifts. And so now, we've talked about this, but the Predators have just busted this window open, and it's still going to stay open for a long time. But no, goaltending is huge. And I think, in fact, that's, I kind of raised my eyebrows, obviously, when I saw, Nashville ranked ahead of Colorado. That's interesting. One of the reasons that Adam has Colorado not finishing as high as Nashville is the goaltending situation.
Yes.
Alexander Georgiev is not UC Saros. And he's one of those that, like, when he's on, he is on, but when he's off, oh my, is he off? And it's like too streaky, and it's, it can be problematic. And that reason alone, I mean, not alone, but it's one of the main reasons that he's like, yeah, you know what? I don't feel confident ranking this team higher than Nashville because of that. And so that should tell you how important goaltending is. Now, in recent years, as recently as last year, the argument for Nashville has always kind of been, well, they have the great goaltender, but they just don't have the other pieces.
Right.
They don't have scoring in front of them. And then Colorado, you could almost argue, is the opposite. They have Nathan MacKinnon, they have Cale Makar, they have Mikko Rantanen, they have Devon Taves, but they don't have an elite goalie. And so it's like, you can't win either way. Like, you got to have kind of a mix of both. And I think that Nashville, if we're going by that logic alone, Nashville does have a better combination of those two elements.
Yeah. And for a while, there's been this argument about, do you have to have, it used to be you have to have elite goaltending to be a serious deep playoff team. And now there's sort of this discussion of like, what, you need reliable goaltending, and then you can have these superstars that can carry you. But I'm just not sure that's the easy way. And like you said, Nashville has brought in Stamkos. They brought in Marchessault. They have Philip Forsberg. We've talked about, Roman Josi. We've talked about the season that Nyquist and Ryan O'Reilly had last year. And this is a team that could have both of those. And you're better with both than risking it on one or the other. I agree with that. The other factor that I loved that Adam mentioned is Barry Trotz. It's that Trotz factor, y'all. Barry Trotz has come into this general managing position like a man possessed. Like, he is not afraid to make bold moves because this is a guy who is so hungry to get a cup in Nashville. And that is certainly not to say that David Poile wasn't. Of course he was. But Barry Trotz, this offseason, no holds barred. And that it was a lot of bold decisions by Trotz, a lot of eggs in a basket.
Yeah, and I think those just bold decisions are what we had been lacking from David Poile. And, again, David Poile is the longest tenured GM in NHL history for a reason. He is excellent at his job, and he's a really skilled negotiator, and he is, he can manage the salary cap with the best of them. Like, he is very, very skilled at a lot of things, but he is one who I would describe as maybe a little risk averse. And I think we saw that. And that's how you end up with a team that can't seem to get out of the middle of the division ever. It's like, they're not going to be bad, but they're not going to be a threat, really. They're just kind of there. And so I think that those kinds of bold decisions were only going to happen if there was a change in, changing of the guard in Nashville, which is what we had when Barry Trotz took over. And I don't think Barry Trotz came in and said, all right, this is my team now, and I'm just going to make all the big moves just because I can. Like, it's still been very calculated, like we've talked about. He's making these moves. Yes, Nashville is probably closer against the salary cap than maybe they've ever been, but they're still there. And these moves, they make sense. It's not just like, okay, let's just go get a bunch of good players and see where they fit. It's like, no, we're addressing very specific needs here. We need help on the power play. We need help on the penalty kill. Address that. We need size on defense. Address that. Like, he's checking off very specific boxes with these acquisitions, but they are kind of the bigger, bolder moves that we probably wouldn't have seen from David Poile, at least not all in one offseason.
Yeah. I wonder how much of that, and I don't know that there's any way to know this unless you really sat down and had deep conversations with David Poile and Barry Trotz, but you wonder how much of that is that coaching perspective that Barry Trotz brings to the general manager position, having been a coach who won a Stanley Cup, having been a coach who got close, having been a coach who missed the playoffs at times entirely. How much of that coaching experience helps him weigh that risk reward, especially in those very specific checked boxes, not just like, hey, we need an elite scorer. I mean, there's very specific things, like you mentioned, he's looking for. And so I think that's really interesting. And, I would love to pick Barry Trotz's brain about that sometime, but he's a little busy right now. As are we, let's be honest. We got stuff going on too. Now, there are some reasons why in this article there could be some, reasons why it may not happen. As Emma and I like to say, what are the hitches in the giddy up? And I think Adam brings up some pretty good points of like, okay, hey, here's like a factor. First thing he mentions, the top four top four paid players, there it is, have an average age of 33 and a half years old. Top four paid defensemen are 31 years old, 3 months. You're going to be relying heavily on veterans, relatively old in hockey years, veterans. How risky is it, Emma, for Nashville to bank this deep postseason run, this cup contending window on veterans of a quote certain age?
Far be it for me to start throwing cliches out there about age is just a number or you're only as old as you feel, because I hate it when people say that to me. But I do think in this case, there is some truth to it, because it would be one thing if any of these guys, Stamkos, Marchessault, Roman Josi, for example, as being, kind of the older guys on this team, it would be one thing if any of them had shown any signs of slowing down recently. Like these guys, I feel like anyone who wants to point out the age, like, yes, obviously it's there, it exists, but it's nitpicking. It's like you're trying to fault find, you're just trying to find something wrong. And it's like, okay, well, let's look at it. Jonathan Marchessault, 2 years removed from winning a Conn Smythe. Steven Stamkos just had a 40-goal season.
Yeah.
Roman Josi was just a Norris finalist. Like, I'm sorry, but you're anyone who's going to argue that these guys, that age is a hindrance, like that argument doesn't hold much weight for me, because if you look at what these guys have done just in the last 2 seasons alone, it's like, I'm sorry, but these do not look like guys who are over the hill by any means. Now, in 4 years, when Steven Stamkos is at the end of his contract, or is he going to probably be, producing what he is now? Probably not. But again, the hope is that you don't need him to, because by then you have all these younger guys coming up through the system who are kind of going to take over that leadership, and you're going to rely on them for more. And I mean, again, you kind of get to a point where it's like, well, you don't need to rely on those same, like that same group of guys to do the
There's a
same.
transition.
Yeah.
There's a transition. I would agree with that. I'm a big fan of saying age is not a disease. And as of recent, you haven't seen signs of decline. And I would say, you and I said on yesterday's show, training camp only shows you so much, that, you only see so much. But we are watching Nyquist, Ryan O'Reilly, Roman Josi. We're seeing Steven Stamkos, Jonathan Marchessault in training camp. And there is nothing about Ryan O'Reilly's training camp that makes me say, ooh, lost a step over the offseason there, big guy. Like, we're just not seeing that. Now, when it comes to the regular season, that's when it really counts. But there aren't red flags from last season for some of these veterans. And I will say this, my argument when people say, oh, it's the age of this team, I think that can be a very valid argument. I think you have to look at the specific situation, because you're looking at age. But in this case, what's I think more important is experience, especially postseason experience. Steven Stamkos, 128 postseason games. Jonathan Marchessault, 102 postseason games. Ryan O'Reilly, 81 postseason games. Even Gus Nyquist played 77 postseason games. And, we heard from Luke Evangelista, in talking with him, he talked about there is this huge leap from regular season hockey to playoff hockey. And you've got guys on this roster who have made that leap pretty consistently and pretty successfully, quite frankly. And I just come back to, like, if you are going to climb a mountain, do you want the Sherpa who may be a little rugged and worn looking, but he has been there before? Or do you just want to go, hey, I'm going to pick the young guy with a lot of energy and drive, and he has a general idea of where we're going? No, you take the guy who has been there before.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's a good way to look at the veterans.
Yeah. And, again, it's not the ideal situation is you have a mix of both. Maybe you have 2 Sherpas, you have the one guy, the one like older grizzled guy who knows where he's going, but maybe sometimes if he stumbles, then the young guy with all the energy kind of picks up the pace there and picks up some of the slack. And I think that that's kind of what you want in a team. But again, if you rely too much on one or the other, like if you throw a whole team of Luke Evangelistas out there for the playoffs,
You're
it's
going to get great quotes.
yes, you're gonna get great quotes. You're gonna get some great chirps on the ice too. But I think it's a little bit of just being like, all right, let's see what happens. Like, because you don't really know what you're going to get. And that's why Barry Trotz talks so much about the importance of having serial winners. Like it becomes kind of a trope now with anyone who covers the Predators, like, serial winners, because we hear it all the time. But that's exactly what he's talking about. It's like, and for Luke Evangelista specifically to actually recognize that huge leap now that he has been in the playoffs once, now he sees it. These younger guys are starting to get it. They're like, oh yeah, that's why we need all of these guys to kind of show us the way. And then that turns them into serial winners. And then they show the next wave of younger guys the way. And that's kind of how you want to build a culture.
Yep. And, that's how Barry Trotz has kind of laid this out. Let's hope that, this 2024-25 season sort of kicks off that trickle down effect. Coming up, we are going to talk about why Adam believes the Preds could leapfrog Colorado. And are there any other things that we worry about or that we say, yep, that's going to get it done for the Preds? If you are looking forward to seeing this Nashville Predators team play this season, or if you just are looking for some great fall events, you've got to check out the deals at Gametime. Gametime is the fastest and easiest way to get tickets for your favorite sports event, for music, theater, comedy shows, and more. Gametime now has this great feature. It's called Gametime Picks, and it makes getting tickets for your favorite events even easier. Gametime Picks filters out all of the fluff, and it shows you only incredible deals on great seats, so you're not going to waste time sifting through all of those thousands of tickets. Gametime has great deals right now on sporting events like Nashville SC, the Tennessee Titans, Vanderbilt and Tennessee Tech football. If you love Post Malone, he is coming to Nissan Stadium next month. You can get your tickets on Gametime. And friends, you can go play the prices right at TPAC in October via Gametime tickets as well. Gametime has a low price guarantee and the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. All right, Emma, when you think about what could go wrong for Nashville, where they would fall out of second place in the Central or even maybe third place in the Central, are there any other kind of red flags that you're like, this could be a real problem that could cost Nashville?
Yes, but I don't want to speak them into existence, Anne, because I am so superstitious. But let us just say now, well, we would like no one to get injured ever on
ever.
any team for anyone. You don't wish that on anyone. You may wish that certain players on certain teams like don't play their best, but you don't wish for them to be injured. There are certain individuals on Nashville's roster that you would especially not want to get injured or
Yes.
have to miss any significant period of time because of the value that they bring to the team. And they're kind of I'm going to go into baseball speak for a second, but the stat that's like wins above replacement.
Yes.
And it's like, how many wins above replacement are they worth? If you replace them with someone else, how many wins do you now not get as a result? And so I think that there are certain players on every team, but we're talking about the Preds, certain players who maybe have a higher wins above replacement status than others. Particularly perchance in goal. We did just talk about the importance of goaltending.
Yes.
Now, again, I don't mean any disrespect towards Scott Wedgwood. As we've discussed, I am a big Scott Wedgwood fan.
Mhm.
However, if God forbid, knock on everything, something were to happen to Nashville's other goaltender, I don't know that Scott Wedgwood is the guy to really carry you into a postseason race. I mean, he will be serviceable and he will be fine. Like, there are certainly worse positions you could be in. You could be Vancouver and end up with your third string, rookie, which actually worked out pretty well
Turned
for
out
them.
fine for them.
So, you never know. You really never know. But I think that's an area of concern for me. Now, we've talked about people who argue, well, you don't need great goaltending in the playoffs. You just need like the superstars to take care of it. Okay. But Nashville doesn't have those superstars. Like, I'm sorry, like they don't
There's
have.
not a Connor McDavid.
There's not a Connor McDavid. There's not a Nathan MacKinnon. There's not a Sidney Crosby. Like, I'm sorry. It's just, and I don't mean any disrespect to anyone on this team, but like, there's no one that really can kind of be the
Carry the
equalizer.
whole team. Yes,
Yeah.
carry that whole team. Yeah,
Yeah.
I would agree
So
with that.
that would be my biggest concern. But again, I'm not speaking it into existence.
Yep. We may just edit that whole part out. We're manifesting nothing, my friend.
Just bleep it out.
Bleep it out. The one thing that I just and Adam Proteau mentioned this in his article, but he was talking about what a good season Nashville had last year. Like, these players came up and stepped up. But I have this thing that I worry about. And again, manifesting nothing here. But you look back and it's like, without that win streak, Nashville's not a playoff team. Was that win streak lightning in a bottle? I don't think so. I don't think so, because I think they held their own very well in the postseason. Even when the win streak was over, I felt like Nashville was able to build on that. But there is this little hitch in my giddy up about, can the Predators start from that point? Can the returning players start from the point where they left off and continue to improve? And that's a big ask. I think it's a big ask on any team. I think it's a big ask for the Nashville Predators. I'm hopeful. I think we've seen great signs from the top line in training camp. Again, it's just training camp. I think Luke Evangelistas in a good place. I think we would agree that we've seen Tommy Novak in the training camp scenario taking some steps, and he's got these great opportunities. But you need this team, if they're going to be a deep cup contender, to start where they left off. I'm hoping they can do that.
Yeah, I think, the idea is that streak, I think Barry Trotz saw that, recognized it as not lightning in a bottle, and that is what kind of showed him, oh, we're actually pretty close. We just need a couple more pieces. And that is kind of why he went out and did what he did in free agency this offseason, because if he really thought that it was lightning in a bottle and not something that they could repeat, it would be like, all right, guys, settle down, like, and let's focus on
another year.
Let's focus on the draft. Okay. Like, I mean, I think that it was kind of a vote of confidence that, hey, we saw you do this last year. Now we're not going to, ask for 18 games again. But what that did was show us how close we really are. So let's add these pieces to just, kind of hopefully get us over that hump.
Yeah. Adam did mention why he feels like Colorado may be behind Nashville. And I thought there were some interesting points he made. He said, there are definite question marks. They no longer have maybe that elite depth. We talked about, Nashville had this big splashy offseason, but I want to point out that Colorado didn't, because they really didn't need to. That's one of the things you have to remember. Like, yes, Nashville went out and they got all these great players and they added these great players, but there are teams like Colorado that just didn't need to go out and get a big fish. They just needed to maybe shore up some things. So I think they have a very good roster. The one thing that I think could be challenging for Colorado is the injury situation and getting like Gabriel Landeskog back. Arturi Lankinen. Both of those guys are supposed to be ready near the start of the season. You've got Val Nichushkin, who is out until I think mid-November with the Players Assistance Program. And so how those players jump back into the roster, I think, will be interesting. They're all very experienced, consummate professionals. It may be fine, but there are some questions about Colorado. And if Nashville can come out of the gate well and maybe get a leap on Colorado and start a little hotter than they did last season, that may go a long way in helping them kind of best Colorado. But I gotta tell you, I still think Colorado is not only a threat to be better than Nashville in the Central, I think they're a threat to win it all. I think they're a serious team you have to look at as a team that could win the cup.
Yeah, and I think, they're one of those teams, they have one of those superstars where I think you can say, as long as you have Nathan MacKinnon, you have a chance.
Yes.
He is
Yeah.
the great equalizer, kind of like Connor McDavid or Sidney Crosby. Like I've said before, he's on that level. And I think you talk about their offseason moves, how they didn't need to make as many moves. Totally agree. I think a really under the radar move that they made, it was really, like you said, just shoring up some things. Their biggest need, they like Nashville, they needed a 2C. They needed a legit second line center. They thought they had one in Ryan Johansson. That did not work out.
Bless.
So what did they do at the trade deadline last year? They go out and get Casey Middlestat from Buffalo. That has worked out even better than they could have expected. And they locked him into a contract extension this offseason because he was going to be a free agent at the end of the year. So even though that wasn't a big fish per se, that was a huge need for them, and they addressed it and got it done, early in the offseason. So it was like, all right, we're set. Like you said, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah. Adam Proteau, we thank you for your optimism. While we are hoping that you are manifesting something great for the Nashville Predators, like I said, we've shared some of our reservations about Nashville finishing second in such a competitive Central Division. Do want to say, if you want a closer look at the teams in the top of the Central Division, you have absolutely got to check out the Central Division's Elite Four crossover. It just dropped last night on our YouTube channel. I got to sit down with the hosts of Locked On Avs, Locked On Stars, and Locked On Winnipeg Jets, and we talked about our respective teams and how we see them doing in the Central Division. Friends, we had a ton of fun, and you're also going to get some great insight on the competition in the Central. So make sure you check out that video. Before we sign off for today's episode, Emma, let everyone know where they can find you and your work.
You can find me on social media at Emma_Lingen, and you can find my work at The Hockey News.
And you can find me at Penalty Box Radio. You can find me on social media at ANK_Mama on Ice. That is going to do it for this episode of the Locked On Predators podcast. Thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We will be back tomorrow with an all new episode. We will see you then.